Hello, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We are very happy to run this webinar today in continuation of the excellent discussion which we had over the past few weeks around InnoGrid. This webinar has been made to further discuss and deep dive onto the content of the new research and innovation roadmap, which was recently produced by our TSO community. And I'm Laurent Schmidt, I'm the Secretary General of ENTSO E, and I'm going to work and introduce the first part. So if we go to the first slide, I would like to remind you housekeeping rules. Video and audio are only allowed for speaker and panelists, and their video has been switched off while they don't speak. And if any of you are interested to interact with us, and we really welcome that, we would propose to go to Slido, and here you see basically the relevant connection detail. So please indicate into Slido your name and company institution when you post a question, so that we can refer to it. And as moderator, I will, and then the next one will also select a couple of questions which are reporting into Slido based on their popularity, and ask them to the relevant speaker and panelists. So we are not going to use the chat and raise hand feature of GoToWebinar, and so please log into Slido for your question. Okay, so as a starting point, I will give a few words of introduction to reposition the context of this research and innovation roadmap. This actually come very handy at exactly at the same time when we produce our new scenarios projecting the trajectory, possible trajectory of the European power systems between now and 2050. And I would like to remind here on these slides, basically the steps and how we work at ENTSO E, where we are looking really on two different time horizons. The first one is 2030, and we are working very closely on that for TYNDP, Network Development Plan, Network Code, Clean Energy Package implementation, IT tool and platform, which is preparing the short to mid-term horizon. And in the same time, we also closely follow the European targets for 2050, as set out now through the Green Deal, and which we have now fully incorporated into our vision thinking, Vision 2030, which end up into the power system becoming a system of interconnecting system, as well as basically our new long-term scenario, which have just been released, where we are really worked out to rethink our scenario from a carbon budget perspective, and heading towards being carbon neutral for 2050. So if we go to the next slide, you see here what is coming out of our new scenario work. As what I was saying, there are three scenarios which we are currently investigating to project the trajectory of the evolution of the pan-European system. One is based on the National Energy and Climate Plan, which is the bubble blue you see on that slide, plus two top-down scenarios, which have been co-constructed together with a large majority of industry associations, both of them targeting COP21 compliant scenarios, 1.5 degree, and basically trying to achieve, from a broad system perspective, carbon net zero carbon neutrality, so integrating both electricity with other sectors, particularly the gas sectors. If we go to the next slide, we start seeing what are the main outcomes of our various scenario exercise. So of course, these scenarios project different trajectory. One of them, which is more related to a large, massive development of the electrical system, which is referred as distributed energy, where you see that the renewable share will reach 82% into this scenario by 2050. And you can definitely see on that slide the total disappearing of fossil fuel, coal, natural gas, and the progressive migration into green gases. And what is really striking into this scenario are the importance milestone of 2030 for coal phase out at 2035, as well as the full system decarbonization on the electrical side by 2050, and then later between 2040 and 2050, further decarbonization of other sectors through new technologies such as green hydrogen. So what we really, and the other global ambition scenario is a similar trajectory, but relying more on the large amount of green gas. So what comes very clear into this scenario in the significant shift and change which is required into the European power system, particularly to enable that kind of change. And I think this is the topic of today, where we clearly see that this transformation will not be able to be achieved without a very solid innovation roadmap and a strong commitment from our community to move along this innovation roadmap. If we go to the next slide, we see here how in this scenario we have projected the impact of energy efficiency. And here we see that this scenario do project further energy efficiency improvements that what are existing right now in the National Energy and Climate Plan. What is interesting is the amount of new technology which we see emerging at the edge of our systems, being heat pump, being electrical vehicle, green hydrogen, which is definitely going to change the way the power system is coupled to, I would say, parallel sectors, and the need to look at these system from an holistic view. If we go to the following slide, I think in continuation of that trend is what you see here, the impact in terms of generation mix and the very massive amount of generation capacity required when it comes to renewable, being solar and wind, as well, and the various steps seen through these trajectories. And we definitely see the power system radically changing between today and 2050, and once again requiring a strong innovation. So that's in a nutshell the introduction of this first part, and I will immediately hand over the floor to Patrick Child from the DG Research, who is going to introduce how he sees research, development, and innovation is a key pillar of the Green Deal from a European Commission's perspective. So Patrick, I hope you can hear me.
I can hear you very well, Laurent. Thank you very much, and very happy to be with you. And thank you for inviting me to this important event. And indeed, I think it's a great opportunity for me to explain a little bit how we see in the European Commission the challenges and opportunities of the European Green Deal, particularly in the present context of the post-COVID crisis recovery, which we hope will now take strength. And also to talk a little bit about how we see the energy sector, and in particular the energy transmission sort of contribution to all of that. So, I mean, to start, just a word or two on the post-COVID recovery. I mean, I think we see that the economic path ahead will be long and challenging, but that there are some extremely immediate needs, and in particular that the immediate needs associated with the energy transition are probably even more important than they were before. In the late May, the European Commission has presented its proposals for an economic recovery plan under the general title of Europe's Moment, Repair and Prepare for the Next Generation, including a very strong focus on investment in clean technologies and value chains, with a new sort of 750 billion euro investment vehicle on top of the 1.2 trillion euros that we've already proposed for the EU budget for the next financial cycle for 2021 to 2027. And what we see, and I think will be very important, is that research and innovation will play a very prominent role in this recovery strategy. And there are a number of key strategic areas where research and innovation initiatives can both promote recovery, but in particular boost economic activity in the short term. And a key element of this is our proposals for a strategic investment facility, which will help to invest in the energy transition, including in areas like hydrogen, renewable energy, storage technologies, batteries, carbon capture and storage, and and energy infrastructure. And as part of this overall economic recovery package, Horizon Europe, our next framework program for research and innovation, will receive a top-up of 13.5 billion euros. And some of that will be addressed specifically on programs to support clean energy technologies. And that perhaps brings me to the second point I wanted to touch on, which is the European Green Deal. I think what is extremely positive and good news is that notwithstanding the really challenging economic environment that we're all facing following the crisis, that the Commission's proposals maintain an extremely strong focus on advancing with the Green Deal, European Green Deal agenda, as well as the digital transformation, both of which I think are very, very relevant to the work that you're doing in the energy transmission sector. The European Green Deal is intended, as you know, significantly to raise our level of ambition with the medium-term objective of full decarbonisation, to make Europe the first fully decarbonised continent by 2050. And of course, the transition of the energy sector is a core part of the Green Deal. And therefore, we have very ambitious goals to ensure that renewable energy becomes a key source of all of the main energy consuming sectors, whether it's buildings, transport, or infrastructure. And so we need to see a further major rollout of renewable energy sources, whether that's through renewable electricity, renewable fuels, or renewable heating and cooling. And for this to succeed, obviously energy storage and grid technologies, and in particular the way finding new ways of integrating clean energy technologies are going to be key in driving the transition and in securing the reliability of our future energy systems. So within the European Green Deal agenda, there are a number of key sort of energy related milestones. Already next week, the European Commission will present new proposals, a new strategy for energy system integration, bringing together all the different components in the energy system so we can better exploit synergies and work towards a genuinely integrated energy system, including by increasing the use of renewable and low carbon electricity by electrification of sectors that still rely on fossil fuels. Later this year, we are going to come forward with two other proposals and communications. Firstly, a new strategy for offshore wind later in 2020, and another focus on the renovation wave, addressing in particular the challenges of energy efficiency in buildings across the European Union. And we hope that this will help to lower the energy bill of consumers and tackle energy poverty. Horizon 2020, our existing research and innovation framework program, is already testing solutions to decarbonize critical sectors, including maritime, aviation, and construction. And we've announced earlier this year a new dedicated call for proposals amounting to something like 1 billion euros to give a sort of kickstart to some of the priorities in the European Green Deal. This Green Deal call will be published, we hope, in September, including some big topics on renewable energy technologies and, importantly, their integration into the energy system. Looking a little bit further ahead, Horizon Europe, which will come on stream at the beginning of next year, will give us considerably strengthened resources to support the clean energy transformation, and in particular the research and innovation contributions that we can bring in order to boosting efficient and effective energy networks that are capable of integrating a significant share of variable renewable energy production. And this is an area, therefore, that we will give particular focus in the early programming of research and innovation investments. Looking further ahead, energy systems and grids will be one of our key intervention areas for funding under Horizon Europe. and that the focus here will be on systemic aspects, including integration of renewables and storage solutions for the energy systems. And going a little bit more into the detail, we hope to be able to address issues like the pan-European transmission of energy, including offshore grids for transporting offshore renewable energy, innovative grid planning solutions, including the integration of digital technologies into the operation of the energy system, and finally, international cooperation and common solutions. Just before I conclude, I'd like to say a couple of words also on hydrogen, because as you will all have seen, hydrogen, I think, has gained significant political support and momentum in the recent past, with also a new strategy on clean hydrogen, which we are due to present with the system sector integration communication from the Commission next week. And so I think that that is something which also creates both new challenges but new opportunities for the energy transmission sector in Europe in order to harness the very significant potential that we see for clean hydrogen being increasingly a necessary part of our future energy system. So in conclusion, just to say, very happy to see that you are including in the discussion today a strong emphasis on the European Green Deal. We believe this is necessary to fast track the delivery of clean energy solutions, including in the way that we operate the electricity grid. And this is something which is also, I think, highlighted in our draft research and innovation roadmap for 2030. So we're looking forward to seeing how this your roadmap develops in this respect, and very much encourage you to remain in close contact with us as we shape the future research and innovation landscape under Horizon Europe. And in this context, just to conclude with a sort of a pitch for you to maybe attend our Research and Innovation Days conference, which we will be organizing virtually from the 22nd to the 24th of September, a virtual event which, though we hope will have a very, very strong focus on the European Green Deal. Within the European Green Deal, the energy transition as part of our broader strategy to boost recovery in the European economy. So thank you very much for your attention, and I wish you success for this session. Thank you.
Thank you, and I think your speech resonates very well with work which has been done in the last few months in trying to deep dive into what are the important elements seen from the TSO community in terms of research and innovation. And I would also like to thank you and the commissions for all the commitments which you take and make towards our industry, which I'm sure will also allow to create ecosystem jobs and new economies in Europe. So maybe do you still have a few minutes for question, or you need to?
Sure, I could take a couple of questions. I have another meeting at, I think, 1:30, but I'm happy to.
Okay, so I encourage then the people, if you want to raise a question to Patrick, to use the tool. So I've not seen any specific question for the moment, but maybe I'm going to have myself one, which is, what would be your recommendation to our community, to the TSOs, in view of this massive investment which you project in the next 3-4 years to be successful and helpful into this innovation program? So what would be your recommendation?
Well, I think some of the things that you're doing already are extremely positive. I mean, thinking about how the future development of the energy transmission sector will be part of this profoundly reformed energy landscape in the European Union under our Green Deal full decarbonization scenarios is extremely positive. I think that the other thing that I would highlight is the importance, given the very significant investment needs in your sector, which go well beyond what we can, of course, support directly through our research and innovation programs, is to think about ways of bringing together different sources of and different types of funding. I mean, if you look at the recovery package that the Commission has put forward with this very, very innovative approach to mobilizing new investments. So combining things like our InvestEU program, the future European Innovation Council, that is a strong new pillar under Horizon Europe, the Innovation Fund, this new fund for investment and demonstration programs and projects in the energy efficiency, and sort of clean energy environment. I think thinking about ways of federating different sorts of EU funding with funding from industry as well as national programs, and how that fits with your future development scenarios. I think that would be my strongest recommendation.
So that's good news. I think we have really thought hard about that, and what we see is a lot of technology readiness from historical Horizon 2020 project. I would name one, which is promotion on HVDC grids and so on. And we see clearly a topic in the coming months about integrating these technologies together and coming more at a larger scale and accelerating deployment. And that's exactly what you mentioned, which will most likely require to combine financing from various sources, being Horizon, connecting Europe facilities and so on, in order to put this innovation into action into concrete projects. So that's really what we've been trying to work out in our roadmap, and we hope it's going to be successful. A question which came maybe into the Slido is, do you think that what the EU subsidies to fossil fuel are fossil fuel companies are for these companies to transform into clean energy companies? Will they also benefit from this funding? So do we have any specific maybe view on that?
Well, I mean, it's a little bit beyond my individual remit, but I think indeed that there is a general sort of policy direction in the European Commission that subsidies for fossil fuels are one of the obstacles to the sort of progress we'd like to see under the European Green Deal. And so I can imagine that in the policy papers, in particular the paper on sector integration that will come up, that we will mention that issue. I think there's also a debate going on about energy taxation and whether the distribution of energy taxation is, in one way also sort of implied subsidies for certain energy sectors, which needs a fresh sort of Green Deal perspective brought to it. So I mean, certainly it's a topic which is on our agenda, and welcome also your inputs to that debate if you sort of add your voices to the pressure to sort of full decarbonisation and therefore the reduction of and the phasing out of subsidies on fossil fuels and more traditional technologies. If I could just also add to what you said in your comment on my earlier question, I think a particular focus on how the European grid system can adapt to this very strong push that we now have on developing offshore renewables, in particular offshore wind. I mean, one dimension of the Green Deal call that I mentioned in my introduction for Horizon 2020, which will come out this September, will be a push for renewables offshore, but also how those integrate within the grid and how we exploit them in an effective way. And I think that's an area which I know you've been thinking about and which probably will also figure in your roadmap, but it's something which I think will be a sort of an early priority also for us.
Maybe another element I would like to bring regarding our flagship beyond this example of offshore grid was also this notion of one system of interconnected systems, which bring the TSO, DSO element, of course, but also interconnection with other sectors through the sectorial integration debate. And as far as I can understand from our new roadmap, we do see some innovation at the interface of this system on how these systems interact with each other. We also produced 2 weeks ago several papers on sectorial integration where we highlighted some key recommendation, making sure that a decarbonization of one sector does not further recarbonize another one, making sure that green molecules are produced out of green electrons, if I may say so. And so they are key elements. And we have decided, our board and assembly have decided last week to create a new group about hydrogen into ENTSO E to really try to figure out particularly the interaction between the electricity system and the future hydrogen system in view of the growing momentum as what you were observing into your comments. So I don't see any further question into the tool. So I would like to again thank you for these great news and inputs. And we for sure will look forward to the next interaction with the DG RTD on basically exchanging on our roadmap and making sure that we best respond to the coming calls onto these very important matters. So thank you very much.
And have a great day. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks. Bye-bye. So then I would like now to hand over to the next moderator of the event. So Norela Constantinescu, who is in our secretariat heading the research and innovation team. And so Norela, the floor is yours to go into the details. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Laurent. Welcome everybody to this deep dive event on our ENTSO E RDI 2020-2030 roadmap. I would like to start by passing the floor actually to two colleagues coming from TSO community, which are going to introduce the vision of ENTSO E towards 2030 with a particular focus on market design and system operation. And I would like to pass the floor to Timothée de Croix, coming from Swiss Grid, and who is the chair of the Policy and Communication Group in ENTSO E, which will be followed afterwards for part of the presentation by Damien Cortinas, coming from the French TSO RTE, and which was responsible for the project Vision 2030 in ENTSO E. So Timothée, please take the screen and the presentation now.
Yes, thank you, Norela. I hope you can hear me well. So I'm very happy to be here today to provide with Damien an overview of this Vision 2030 that we developed in the previous year and that we presented at the end of last year at our annual conference. I will give a very quick overview, setting the scene, but basically Laurent and Patrick Child did the job already quite well. So to say it very shortly, I think we are in a very exciting times with a fast-moving environment, which is clearly driven by the policy against climate emergency. There are major changes for the electricity system. In several dimensions. The first one is, of course, how electricity is generated. Generation is now cleaner, more variable, and more distributed. There is a huge increase of offshore wind, for example, that is expected, and that was already mentioned before. A second dimension is also, of course, on consumption side. There is also major changes there with new usage, with, for example, the electrification of other sectors, such as electrical vehicles, and of course with also more active consumers. And the third dimension is of course the integration of sectors. We also mentioned that earlier, and I really look forward to seeing what is the strategy on energy system integration that is supposed to come next week will present. On top of that, there is also the digitalization that is also a major trend which brings a lot of developments and opportunities for the power sector. In general, all these changes make the environment more complex. We have more complex system operation. We have a new role for the energy system and the electricity system. We need new coordination and better coordination between different levels, for example, between TSOs and DSOs. Also the speed of the network development, is not always matching the speed of West development. That's also an additional challenge. But all the changes are also creating a lot of opportunities. For example, digitalization, give more tools for operating the systems in a smarter way. We have also more active consumers and so on. Because of all these evolutions, and because also the political framework is evolving quite quickly, we, TSOs, and also, of course, more generally, the electricity system will need to evolve. We think that we, TSOs, and also the whole electricity system really have a central role to play to enable the Green Deal objectives, a very ambitious new European policy on environment and climate. That's why also we worked on this Vision 2030 to identify the challenges that we will have to face in the coming decade, and also to be prepared to face them, because 2030 on our time scale is basically tomorrow. Maybe we can move to the next slide. Yes, thank you. So this Vision 2030, it's the result of about 2 years of work in ENTSO E. It involved experts from TSOs from the whole of Europe, and experts in the field of sector operation, market design, but also building on the work of system planning experts. System planning experts deliver the 2030 scenarios, which provide a shared view for our future, and then system operation and market design experts built on that in order to deliver a holistic view and a robust 2030 vision. I think this whole vision is really based on expert view, TSO expertise, and really provides a real expert view on the challenges that we will have to face. I think the future that we are facing and that we will live in a few years and decades is a dynamic one. It requires a lot of new solutions, and that's why also this RDI roadmap that will be presented today is really an essential piece to complete the whole picture that is set by this Vision 2030. And then I would like to finish to highlight that this vision is not the end of the road. In a way, we now want to really engage in a dialogue with stakeholders around this vision. We will do that, especially this autumn, with a series of webinars that we will organize, an ENTSO E Vision Week. The date will be announced in a few days or weeks. And we really hope also that this vision is a valuable contribution to from the TSO community to the whole dialogue and to the work of policymakers that is ongoing. I will now give the floor already to Damian, who will present a bit more concretely and more in detail what is in this 2030 vision.
Thank you, Timothy. Can you hear me? Sound working right? Okay, thank you. You can go to the next slide, please. So, in a nutshell, what's in this vision? And the point, maybe back to the previous one. You have passed. In a nutshell, if you can go back, this one. In a nutshell, what's in the vision that we have developed with all these TSOs, all this work? The point today is not to present each one of these issues, because this will be there will be the engagement that we'll do it the autumn, but to give you an idea of what's inside. And in the end, we identified with all the TSOs and all the experts that were part of this work what we call 6 key drivers for the next 10 years. What we call a driver is something that is going to change very fundamentally the way we do business as TSOs and the way the European system today is managed, operated, and developed. The 6 drivers are the ones you have here. I think most of them you will agree, and most of them were already introduced in the presentation by Mr. Child before. The first one is distributed flexibilities. In the next 10 years, we are going to see a lot of renewables going into the distribution system, but also storage, also customer-centered possibilities to use their local energy systems. This will change the balance about where the flexibilities are in the system. I will need a very much closer TSO cooperation in the future, and it is something we are looking forward to. Sector integration, we have already talked about it. Beyond power, all the different systems will need to work together. The third driver is markets and physics, and this will be a whole seminar in itself, how we need to better integrate the way the markets operate with the way the system is operated in the future. The grids are going into the sea now with the wind generation and interconnections that are built into the seas. The networks today in the future, today are mainly in land. In the future will be more mixed between land and the sea. The network will also be more mixed between alternative and direct current, because most of the new technologies we are putting into the system comes from power electronics, and the system was not built for this at the beginning. And what we call operational challenges that are more our internal business as TSOs, but that will also be important to adapt. Mainly, the resilience is the first one, including cybersecurity, but also other kind of threats, like physical threats or the pandemic. We are now in the midst of it. The ability to forecast and the ability to take into account all the promises of the new technologies of automation and artificial intelligence. In the rest of the presentation, you will see how this is incorporated into the R&D program. But now I am just going in the next two slides to give you an overview of what all this means, because we have developed these drivers, but when we put them together, they mean two things. Next slide, I will introduce the first idea that comes from this. The first thing that it means is that the future is going to be what we call a true system of systems. In the past, we had this system managed by TSOs with transmission networks that work together. In the future, is going to be a system of interconnected systems with TSOs and DSOs. This is something that I think very obvious today, with markets and physics that are two systems that need to come together in a much stronger way in the future, with onshore and offshore grids, with the cooperation between TSOs through regional coordination centers, with alternative and direct current into the system, and also beyond power with sector coupling with other technologies. This future is going to be what we call this system of systems, and these have profound implications for the way we manage this future of the European energy sector. And this is in my last slide. Another way to see this is that these drivers, I'm just waiting for the slide, go into two main directions that if you see, some of them are pointing to a system that is going to be more European. For instance, markets and physics parts, for instance, the offshore part, for instance, the way to introduce some of the new technologies. This will need a stronger European cooperation than today. But at the same time, this also drives into the direction of a more local interaction in the future. Flexibilities, cooperation with DSOs, all the automation capabilities and artificial intelligence that comes into place, even the forecast. This will also point to a more local system in the future. So the main paradigm will be this one. We'll go for a very national TSO center system I have today to a system that is going to be a system of interconnected systems that will be at the same time more European and more local. And in this future, the main idea that we are putting into it is that our role as system operators, and we have operators with an S, because there will be a lot of operators, not only TSOs that will come into place, will be how to facilitate this whole system of systems to work together one with the others, and to be able to integrate at the same time the local loop with the European integration that we are building, and to be sure that everything works together, and in the end we are building something that is efficient and that develops the promises of the European decarbonization in a way that is efficient for European customers of electricity. This is really in a nutshell. You are going to see in the next presentations how the RD and innovation program, it's taking a lot of these ideas into place into the development we're going to put in place. But also we are planning, as Timothy said before, to organize what we call a Vision Week this autumn. So this is just a kind of a teaser where we're going to go much more into these different drivers and the way you put together, because this is something that clearly the system of systems needs to go outside, to work and to interact with all the stakeholders that are into the system of systems that are a much bigger community. And for this, we really look forward for the input today and that we're going to have in the future. A very short presentation, again, more like a teaser, and also to give you a vision about how this is going to influence what we are going to see just after that on the RDI roadmap that we have put together at ENTSO E. Thank you. I don't know if there are any questions for Timothy.
Thank you, Timothée and Damian. For the moment, I don't see any questions. Please post while maybe I'm talking. If I will ask you from my side a question regarding the link to the previous presentations of Laurent Schmidt and Patrick Child. Patrick Child mentioned that actually now this recovery plan, which is going to be put forward by the European Union, is going to look in quick investments. In your perspective, from TSO community point of view, where do you think that these quick investments should take place by looking in what you presented as key drivers, but also as potential opportunities for the TSO community?
I would say my first reaction will be all of them, of course, but then if you want to maybe focus on the ones who are the most relevant and where investments now can really give value in the short to medium term, I would say that the three main areas we need to invest in the short term is this concept of mixed AC and DC networks, because they are already there, and we needed to invest. There are smart investments that can be made in order to make it work and to make it go from what could be a problem to a world of opportunities to manage the system much better than today. The TSO cooperation, we need to build tools in order to be able to unlock all the value that come from these flexibilities for the whole system. And also, but I think this is something that everybody has in mind, the offshore grids of tomorrow, the development into the seas. This have a lot of promises for the future of electricity in Europe. This is something we need. We also need to invest, particularly in research, development, and innovation, in order to make it happen in a way that delivers all the promises that it has.
And if I can complement, I think I fully agree with what you say there, but I think one thing which maybe should not be forgotten when we talk about investment and the recovery plan and so on. We want to accelerate the energy transition, and that's absolutely good, and we support this objective. But we should not forget that investing in the grid in general is something which is essential to integrate the additional renewables and to make this energy transition effective. So yeah, I think that the general grid investment should just not be forgotten in this recovery plan.
Thank you very much to both of you. Very quick questions which are coming now. So the policy for open data, TSO and DSO to develop a system of system solutions. And then we go further down regarding the map of DSO link in the last slide. So the first question is about the open data access TSO DSO for researcher to develop system solutions.
For sure, this is one of the keys of the TSO DSO cooperation. How to share data, how to share the data in a way that benefits the customer, because we should always have in mind that we are doing all this in the end to benefit the European customer with reliability, with price, and with services. And for sure, this is now one of the subjects of discussion. Now TSOs and DSOs are discussing how do we put in place a chain of data that answers these questions. Today, I do not have today details on how to do it, but for sure, to say to you that this is one of the main issues, and this is something that is already under discussion between TSOs and DSOs on how to make it happen. With European initiatives, some of them come from the legislation, but also with national initiatives in a lot of countries that are very, very interesting to follow about how to make it happen. So for sure, this is something really, really important. And on the graphic, what I would say is, yes, of course,
It's ENTSO E ENTSO cooperation, Damian, mainly.
Yeah, the TSOs. Go ahead, Timothy.
No, just to complement on data policy in general, I think that's also a very important issue. The Commission consulted on this topic more generally, not only on TSO, DSO data exchange, but in general on data exchange in the energy sector and on data openness. And as ENTSO E, we really support this. I mean, our answer to the public consultation should be public on the ENTSO E and on the Commission website. In general, we really support data openness in the energy sector to be able to develop new applications and so on with this data. And we also do a lot of work in this direction with the transparency platform at ENTSO E level. I mean, it's going further than just with the DSO, TSO topic. It's also concern generation and so on.
Okay. Thank you very much for answering these questions. Unfortunately, I cannot take all of them because we have to also respect the timeline. Thank you again, Damian and Timothée. And now I would like to pass actually the floor to Håkon Borgen, who is the chair of ENTSO E Research Development and Innovation Committee. And also Executive Vice President for Technology and Development in Statnett. So Håkon is going to introduce actually how we built up the new ENTSO E RDI strategy by taking into account the TSO needs, but also looking at the other stakeholders and trying to cope with the EU Green Deal challenge. So Håkon, the screen, it's yours.
Thank you, Norella. Thank you for giving this nice introduction. It's good to see that we have more than 200 attendees for this deep dive, where we would like to really present what we are doing now in order to speed up the innovation, in particular between the TSOs, but also in this collaboration with the DSOs, with the players, with the universities. And we think it's a very good opportunity to give you more insight into this. And then I can say that it will be a hearing process, so you are free to give a response to what we present, more than what you will have today. So as you all know, it's a huge effort to reach a carbon neutrality by 2050. It's only 30 years down the road, and it calls for large amount of innovation. And we need to really work together in order to reach those targets. And as Europe's energy system integrates ever-increasing shares of renewable energy, electrification of end users, and sectorial integration, it will play an important role in order to reach the targets. So it's a big responsibility on us as TSOs. We are more than 40 TSOs, and we think that working together in a much more aligned way into the innovation really will create large value. And that's what we try to do now in an even better way. So if you take the next slide, please. ENTSO E do have a mandate, and it's legally binding to create this roadmap. And we have done that twice before. This is the third roadmap. So what we actually are going to do this time is to make it even more focused, as Norella said. So compared to previous editions, the development of this roadmap is a shift from more a catalog of technologies and solutions over to a more problem-solving approach, identifying main challenges and proposed use cases. Secondly, it's an increased focus on TSO core activities, including the planning, operation, and management processes. Third, we have reorganized it into innovation areas, new structured around 3 RDI clusters and 6 flagships to enable more focused, oriented way of doing the innovations and based on the system needs and solutions. And fourth point, it is a shift towards innovation activities with higher technology readiness level, more mature projects, because we need faster deployment and we need implementation of advanced infrastructures faster than ever, actually. Next, please. So by doing this, in this simple overview, you can also find that, of course, in a roadmap executive summary, and also in the production in the document, which is now public. And Sonia will go into it after me, so you will have a good explanation from Sonia after me as well. But I will just underline that in this context, and based on the clean energy package, we have developed this roadmap in a way that we have the first area is focusing on one system of integrated systems, or call it only one if you want, easy to remember. And this focuses on the market expansion through the electrification sector coupling and integration of TSO, DSO interface, and the coordination of the market players. Decentralized generation and increased electrification will require that the TSOs adopt and support market expansion with a focus on the one system of integrated systems, and it will be centered around the cross-sector integration. And we will, of course, have a digital component, and it will also cover the updated roles and responsibilities into the different areas. So stick words are electrification of transport, heating, cooling. All those are key elements that will be part of that area. And we have two flagships. One is dealing with the optimized cross-sector integration, and second is dealing with the development of the ecosystem for a deep electrification, which is typically more into the TSO, DSO domain. And then the second cluster, then we talk about the grid. And also explained earlier today, we need a grid and we need to utilize the grid. And we think that is so important that we lift it up as an area. And that we call cluster 2, power grid, the backbone of the energy system. Well, where the headline is better usage of the current assets and new system level solutions. And here we look into the future market integration. And as a mid-term goal, the transmission grid will have to transport higher volumes of renewables, electricity over long distances. Hence, embedding controllable devices, more facts, more control systems in this cross-border infrastructure, which will ensure that you can optimize the resource management. And we also think that we can use no regrets technologies, because there's a lot of technology out there already, and use it and try to show how you actually can make those solutions be real faster than maybe what we planned for before. But also here, of course, further digitalization or market and power flow control is the key area with appropriate time and location and needs to be assured. And this really underline also the targets of the Green Deal to come up with a fast deployment of innovation. And then the third area is what we can say is the cyber physical system, also linked to the report we launched before Christmas in November. It's dealing with, in a way, the black box areas, all these issues where the TSOs are working daily. Here we see a large penetration of power electronics, further digitalization, stronger connectivity. It will require that TSOs take further actions to ensure soundnesses on the technical side of the cyber physical power system. So here you can see system resilience is one keyword. Security, stability, and restoration after blackouts. When you see what is coming, you see that it will be merger of HVDC and AC, offshore grids, and we need the interoperability dimension to be taken care of. We need plug-and-play solutions. We need vendors which don't build lock-in solutions, and we need openness. And here we have three flagships. One is dealing with, of course, enable the large-scale offshore grid and offshore wind energy into the grid. Second, we call flagship number 5, ensure secure operation of this hybrid AC and DC grid. And flagship 6 is dealing with the control centers and to enhance the control centers operation and interoperability. So all in all, these flagships will create focus and will align the needs seen from the TSOs in close cooperation with players like DSO and other players, which I will come back to. Next slide. The funding. I think based on this need, we think it's of utmost importance that we can align the roadmap and integrate it in a very good way, in such a way that it meets Horizon Europe, Connecting Europe facility. And we think this is a very good way of showing what we see is the need and try then to line it into also the funding schemes which are now there and which we of course would like to use. So we will actually encouraging a collaborative approach here to innovation. And this will enable a more effective implementation of RDI roadmap. And of course, the support and the delivery of the European Green Deal and its related policies is important. And it also fits very well into the policies there with the smart sector integration strategy, revision of the regulation of trans-European network, offshore wind, etc. Next, please. So the way forward. Well, we're here now, and we think that we can say that the TSOs as a community, we are strongly committed to deliver on these flagship projects. And it's already a significant activity into certain areas, such as into the deep electrification, enhanced grid use and control center operations, and interoperability. So activities are ongoing already. So we think that the TSOs will have to pay due attention to other constraints, such as environmental impacts, permitting procedures, public acceptance also. But saying that, we will have these steps ahead, and the implementation plan will be the next. And we will work together and try to align between the TSOs and also the players, how we actually could align and have an even more focused roadmap and an implementation plan which follows from it. So this roadmap is expected to deliver not only solutions for TSOs and the transmission grid, but benefits which should emerge for the whole energy systems in terms of security of supply, more and better integration of renewable energy sources, environmental protection, and it will require mobilization of the whole energy value chain. And that, I think, ends my introduction here. And then I will give the word back to you, Norella, if there are any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Håkon. Yes, there are questions, and I will raise to you. But before going to the questions, I would like to underline once again that actually this deep dive webinar in the RDI Roadmap 2020-2030 of ENTSO E, it's mainly to also encourage you to answer to our public consultation, which you see here on the slide. I will go now to a few questions. Coming from Nuno Souza e Silva. The TSOs are further away from the final customer. So how to find a way to include them actually in the narrative we do in this roadmap? Furthermore, Håkon, mainly it was a question, I think, for the previous panel, but I think it's also relevant for our roadmap. So how we match the bridge between the TSO level, pan-European level, and the local level. So these two questions, if you can answer.
Yeah, I think it's linked to what I just said about the collaboration. And we had this integrated webinar 2 days ago, and I also stressed it between the TSO and the DSO community that we need to find common ground here. We need to cooperate. We are a monopolist, and it's expected that we do that. And based on common targets, I'm convinced that we, by doing this and showing each other's targets, it's easier to come down more concrete on solutions, also dealing with the end customer. And I think openness is the key word here. Innovation in itself will not happen unless you actually share experiences and that we are working together in order to solve it. And we have a lot of initiatives already, but I think in particular the cluster one is really dealing with this kind of issues. And the second is really linked also to the local. Well, I think again the TSOs are there, and we have the DSOs, and we need to work together in order to cope with the end customer. And also this flexibility dimension in itself. We need to unlock this flexibility, and we need to find good way of working together in order to develop those solutions as well.
Thank you, Håkon. The last question will be about how we identify the high technology readiness level in our RDI plan.
That's a good question. I think I can make one example into the offshore grid. I'm actually responsible for the cable to UK, between Norway and UK and over to Germany. And we might say that the HVDC is mature, but we know that going for the offshore grid, the technology readiness level is not that high that we can just build it. So based on experiences, we need to have a process to find out exactly what we can say is more in the piloting mode or what is really commercially available. It's a specific point when you actually can buy it in the store and just build it. Of course, then it's the highest TRL level, but it's a tendency maybe that we think it is higher than it actually is. And actually in this offshore grid area, it's a lot of areas we need to actually develop solutions, but we will seek to be specific on the definition of the TRL level when we do this next step in this implementation plan.
Okay, Håkon. I think this makes also the link to when actually we will deploy these solutions into the grid, and we expect these deployments to happen, I suppose, after 2030, and some of these deployments will also happen before because of these high TRL levels. I hope that we answer more or less to all the questions. I don't want to make it longer, so in order to respect the timeline. Thank you very much, Håkon, for this introduction into the RDI strategy. I will now pass the floor to Uros Salobir, who is going to moderate actually this really deep dive into each of the flagships which were presented before by Håkon. Uros Salobir comes from LS, so the Slovenian TSO, where he is director for strategy and innovation, and he is also the vice chair of research development and innovation committee in ENTSO E. So Uros, from now on, the floor it's yours for moderation.
Thank you, Norela. Thank you, Håkon. And yes, we are now switching into the second part of the event. We will open the final curtain of our secrets behind the roadmap. And I will try to convene this second part with the strong presence of Sonia Berlin, who actually comes from Statnet. She is a professor and she is a chief innovation manager at Statnet, and she is also the convener of working group research development and innovation planning working group, which we have inside RDIC. So the point of the second part is really to show you how these ideas, visions, drivers, opportunities, trends, and everything what we talk can be transferred into actions, milestones, and very exact activities which we plan. Håkon already mentioned we want to move because of the critical time, because of all the challenges in front of us. We also have to start collaborating in a different way, and the roadmap actually gives us this great opportunity to start collaborating in a different way. So there are some elements of this roadmap really focused into external stakeholders, external challenges, and there are also a lot of internal challenges which are addressed here. And we know that vendors also look for these challenges, so we would like to communicate with everyone. But we will go just to describe the scenario for the second part. We will go according to the plan with the flagships, which Håkon already teased us about, and we will go one by one. Sonia is going to present us these flagships, and then we will have a short Q&A session where we will again collect your questions, which are very welcome now in the second part as well. And I will also ask Håkon to stay with us, because if we move into more general field of questions, we will have the Q&A also on a wider scope. So Sonia, I would like to kindly ask you to start with your presentation.
Okay, thank you for the very nice introduction. Then I think we can move on to the next foil, because I skipped that one. It has been a great pleasure for me to work with a large group of people on establishing this research and development and innovation roadmap for the period 2020 to 2030. And I also normally I would say, welcome, how are you all doing? But I can't hear any reaction, so I say it anyway. I hope you all are doing fine, and it's really a pleasure to take this part of the presentation. So what we have been doing, it is we are really dedicated to solve the climate challenges we have. And we have been really considering in what can we as TSOs do regarding innovation to reach these ambitious goals. We have had many workshops, and we thought really had a lot of discussions, and we came upon that it is really important to focus more on what is actually the needs of the TSOs. We have seen in the past that a lot of research has been done, and it is still ongoing, a lot of research. But as you all know, I normally speak about innovation barriers. There are a lot of innovation barriers which we have to tackle. We have to speed up the innovation, and then we have to do this a little bit in a different way. So we have been focusing, okay, if we're going to solve these challenges, what are the needs of the TSOs? And then we have come from to that we need to do 6 flagship projects. And why 6? Yes, because we cannot do 100. If you focus on 100, it's too less focused. If it's maybe 3, it's maybe 2 less. So we ended up with like 6 flagships projects into 3 clusters. And these 3 clusters, I think they are very good clusters and have been introduced by Håkon already. We have the cyber physical system. We have the backbone, and this backbone by interaction could then work together on getting a good integrated system, which is needed. So what I will do now in this is go a little bit more into detail in these flagships that we have been talking about, and it can be in the future that we will add maybe a new flagship if the setting changes a little bit. So we see this also a little bit more dynamic. So then we go to the first flagship. That's the next foil. So the first flagship is that we would like to optimize the cross-sector integration. I will not talk you to all the milestones. So what you see in this foil is some of the milestones that we see essential for reaching than an optimized cross-sector integration. It will comprise of 3 areas. So we need, of course, to reach this ambitious goal, we need good markets. We need the good markets for sector integration. And that means that we need this market architecture and market platforms. We need also optimization tools. And for that, we also have set up a number of milestones where the most important is then maybe planning tools, and it is strategies and operating tools, then optimization tools. We also need then a good system governance, because that needs to be worked upon. The system will look different, and then the governance meet different. So we need standards for interoperability, and we also need regulatory frameworks. That's what I shortly had to say about this flagship. And as I understood, it's now time for 5 minutes question, Jonas, before I move on to the next one. Okay.
Yes.
So I saw one question is maybe I can, yeah, sure. Shoot.
Yeah, at the moment, this question is not really related to our first flagship. So I would like to just ask you a bit of a general question. What do you believe will be the main challenges on this lower part? So we talk about integrated system governance. So that means involvement of different stakeholders. Some of these stakeholders might come from the national level. Some of them might come from the European level. So is this the answer to the previous questions, how we are going to collaborate on these, I would say, different dimensions of our work and challenges in the future?
I think maybe it's partly an answer to that one, because we need to think new, and we need to think about we cannot reach these ambitious climatic goals if not everyone is on board. And we have different stakeholders. We have, let's say, household, we have industrial partners, we will have, let's say, big server halls, we will have the industry, we will have the transportation sector, both in the air, on the road, and on the water, and we need all to work together. This will take both a change in like culture, in how we think. It will also need some changes in you know, how we handle data, how we serve data, how we work together. Because for instance, what's now very unclear is how we let's say engage all the flexibility and transition in the systems that we have now. We cannot right now, we cannot connect a boat or a ferry directly to our control center. So how are we going to do that? How are we going to do that by market? Are we going to do that by other ways? We are not quite sure, so we need to think about that. So yes, we foresee that the interaction with our clients, our customers, consumers, producers needs to be different. We are not quite sure how we're going to do that in a cost-effective and secure way, and that's why we need more research on this topic. I hope this answers your question.
Yeah, does it mean that we actually need to break the existing barriers of our traditional TSO business, that we have to go out on the field, that we have to interact with people which have been never interacted before, that we have to establish some activities within our communities of TSOs which will actually deal with problems which are not our core business problems? Is this what we talk about?
Yeah, maybe it is, and that is what we have to find out by doing research and by exploring our options. Because of course, the relationship with a DSO will still exist, but how are we going to work together with the gas sector? How are we going to work together with the heat sector? These are questions that we don't know the answers to right now. So this is some of the aspects that we have to investigate.
Okay.
We know the potentials are there. We know the TRL levels are very high, but yeah, how are we going to do that? We don't know.
Okay, so I suggest, because we do not have actually a lot of questions. Okay, so there is one coming related to Mari Picasso Terra interconnection. So concerning the market access, are you thinking beyond the coming platforms?
What platforms you maybe means related to the existing platforms? So the platforms for
yeah. So the platforms today which we can foresee are Mari, Picasso, Terra, and similar platforms. So when we talk about integrated system platforms, are we talking about things going beyond these platforms? Are we talking about more than Mari, Picasso, Terra, and similar?
That's that's a very excellent question, and the answer is that we don't know right now. That's why we need research in this area to find out what is a cost-efficient and secure and reasonable way to do this. So I cannot exclude that there will be like new platforms that can be up to one platform. It can be several platforms. We don't know the answer. That's why we need research on these topics.
Okay. Thank you. There is another question. Does the roadmap make the link with the technical market barriers and your RDI proposal?
So our proposal is our roadmap indicates which milestones we would like to achieve. It doesn't say really much about how we are going to achieve the milestone. That is partly then part of the implementation plan that will come. But we are not giving here an answer on how to do the research. This is something that we need to find out in a later stage, because what we have said is that the TSOs need research in this area, and we are really, really pleased to see proposals from relevant R&D partners in proposals on how we can solve this. So we are a little bit in the premature stage, yes.
Thank you, Sonia. I suggest we move to the second flagship, which is very closely linked to the first one because it's part of the same cluster. So please introduce us to flagship number 2.
Yep, then we go to the next slide. So flagship number 2, of course, I mean, as already mentioned in some of the questions, we need to develop an ecosystem for deep electrification, right? We really would like to see that we use less energy, as also was presented in the previous presentations. And one way of losing less energy is to go for electrification. So how we're going to develop this ecosystem, as also was mentioned. Yes, we need to look at a TSO-DSO interface, maybe even in new interfaces, as you mentioned, UROS, with persons we have never cooperated so closely before. We need to look at the different scenarios. We need good models for these scenarios as well, because we are lacking a little bit of good models for this future deep electrification scenario. And we need to also to look at, as again, a new market designs and complement it with ancillary services, as you can see on the horizontal and vertical axis. Some important topics maybe to mention. That is then this interaction between the TSO and the DSO regarding flow, regarding system security, system planning. We need to look and then at the efficient utilizations of flexibility and demand-side response, where both the consumer and the producers are, of course, in focus, or maybe even other market players, or not even, maybe, but I'm quite sure other market players. And we need also that market mechanisms that take into account the security and the adequacy that we need in the system. Because if we go for a deep electrification, it implies also that electrification becomes very important, and it needs to be there 100% of the time. It needs to be reliable. It needs to be secure. So then I'm quite sure that there are some questions regarding this flagship.
Actually, I would like to welcome everybody to really give us some challenges on this Q&A session through the Slido. So Slido is available through the link, and everybody can put the question inside, and please state also your name below it. But right now, Sonia, I would like to just ask you, so the first flagship was more into about cross-sector integration, which means
Yes.
we are moving into the fields which are not dealing 100% with electricity anymore. We are going outside.
Yeah.
So flagship number 2 means going deep electrification, but it means we stay on the electrical grid as such. So is this the main difference between flagship 2 and flagship 1? So what are for you the main differences? So why is flagship 2 so important in relation to flagship number 1, for example? I think this would be quite interesting for the audiences which do not know our plan.
Yes, I agree. It's a very interesting question. So flagship number 1 is maybe how can we design, let's say, a system that is optimized regarding to the cross-sector, and flagship number 2 is maybe a little bit more focused in how we're practically going to do it. So here you see like topics on the potential in the potential both and the potential in decarbonization, but also the potential for the electricity sector regarding to services, industry, heating and cooling. As I said, there will be new load patterns, but they also can supply flexibility to us. So the first is maybe a little bit more on a holistic approach, where this is a little bit more into the details. I hope that is the answer you were hoping for.
Thank you. Now we received quite a lot of questions. So first question about regulators. So how do you see the role of energy regulators in this R&I process? Should they have an active role? And if yes, so what kind of tools should they use to have this active role? Maybe some answers to this question?
I think it's an excellent question. I really encourage everyone to take an active role in this. And I think especially in the previous flagship, where we're looking into regulatory and governance, and here where we look into market design, I think the regulators have a very important role to play. And I am not under the impression that the regulators we have are leaning back and waiting for us to come with solutions. I think they are very proactive and really are welcoming that we as TSOs take a stronger leadership in all these questions. So I can see that regulators are usually involved in R&D projects, and I am really hoping that they continue with their active role in both then having schemes that allow both TSOs and DSOs to perform research and development, but also like participating in projects that that are important to reach these climatic goals and that have an impact. So for instance, you can see regulatory requirements for distributed flexibilities on the left hand upper side of the of this foil you see in front of you, and I'm quite sure that regulatories will be involved in projects like that.
Okay. Thank you. Just one quick question, and then we move forward. So, what about the new ancillary services which are mentioned here? So, should we look for these ancillary services through some new tools, some new models? Is this related to flagship 1, 2, or do you find more suitable to discuss this later?
I think we need ancillary services from many different parties. As mentioned, we maybe somewhere before we have quite a lot of challenges in our grid. One being the inertia, one being the flexibility needed, and flexibility can come from a number of sources. And right now we have a lot of ancillary services that we get for free. But if free, but they are included in, for instance, if you have a coal power plant, you have a you have this rotating mass. But if we go to other sources of renewable energy production, we will lose a little bit of this kind of services that comes more or less automatically with a type of production. So we need to find solutions for that, and one is then flexibility, and then we need to discuss how much flexibility do we actually need, how much flexibility is there, who can give this flexibility. From Statnett side, we have had interesting projects regarding this flexibility, and we found, for instance, some flexibility in the heating industry. But to unlock this flexibility, we need maybe new business models, we need maybe the new digital solutions.
Okay.
So
thank you, Sonia.
a lot of possibilities. Yep.
Yeah. So let's move to flagship number 3.
Yes, flagship number 3. This is done in the cluster, the backbone of the energy system. And as Håkon already introduced, it is how can we enhance the grid use for development for this European market? We have again done a horizontal and vertical axis with 3, let's say, main areas. Where we have then the enhanced power system, where we have interoperable and integrated and standardized platforms, and we also have like new approaches to grid design and not least asset management. So if I can highlight a number of important topics here, it's then, as we were discussing earlier, Uros, done ICT platform. So we need to unleash this on PowerPoint available flexibility and possibilities. We need to unleash this in real life, and then we need ICT solutions for that. We also see that like innovative solutions like digital twin and AI-based coordination and controllable power flow devices will play an important role. We also see that there can be a lot of new technologies that will enable system development, and not the least, we also need to think about that also the solutions that we use, that they are, let's say, we think about issues like circular economy, and that our carbon footprint is on itself not too high. So we really welcome also SF6 free solutions and eco design and life cycle management. So I think these are some of the issues that we need to resolve to be able to have a good grid. Hope maybe some questions.
Okay, so we have had some questions which have already disappeared, but okay, let's take the new one. So hi Sonia, where can international players and partners contribute to your flagships, and what is the best and most comfortable for you?
Okay, so as I said, I encourage really everyone to be proactive. So if you have a possibility, or if you see a possibility to be proactive and to really assist the whole of Europe in reaching this climatic goal, then maybe the easiest way forward is to contact your local TSO, or maybe TSOs in your network, and start to discuss with them, start to contact them and say, hey, I have a proposal, or I have an idea that would really support this flagship. I think that would be the most practical way forward.
Okay, I have another question. How do you see the role of regional security centers in this developments? And do you think that the industry will follow the markets, or the markets will, so energy markets or the energy markets should follow the industry somehow in terms of the push which they make?
Okay, I think it's excellent questions. The regional control centers will have a very important role also in the time to come. To be able to solve all the matters that we have, my opinion is always that there is no single right solution. If there was one solution that could have solved everything for us, we would have already implemented it. So we need a tool of solutions. And then there are like really local solutions. There are on, let's say, in a city, in a region, there are like local solutions and solutions in country-wise. There are like regional solutions in a cluster of countries, and we need to have solutions that are valid for that we need to work upon as the whole Europe. And why is this? Well, innovation in TSOs is extremely complicated because I sometimes make the comparison that we are just like 40 customers, and who is going to make major investments for just 40 customers? So in some areas we really as TSOs have to push push and pull for innovations. And we also see that if we are strong enough together, we can let's say encourage the industry to find the solutions that we need. But what is needed is that we are very clear in what we require. And I think this new way of that we have been forming the roadmap makes it much more clear for the industry what is it that we as TSOs need. And I hope then that this new version of roadmap will then also open up the eyes of the industry and say, okay, this is really clear what they would like to have, and then we can have both a pull and push strategy. But I think both are needed.
Okay. Thank you. I have one more general question, maybe Håkon, if you're still with us. There's a question saying that some activities are quite interlocked, so we have a step in the milestone. So we have a milestone which is preceded by a certain milestone and succeeded by another milestone. So how we are going to manage this chain of activities which have to be performed in a timing matter, so that we do not lose the, I would say, the pace and the focus.
Yeah, I think that's really the idea of doing what we're doing, because we are aligning now the needs and we are really trying to focus on what we think is needed. And we have some sort of logic behind what is first. And we actually discussed quite a lot. Is this too early? Is it too late? And in a way, we need, of course, to update that as we go. But the next step will be to make an implementation plan. And we need to talk between the TSOs, and we need to talk between the players. And I think it's excellent what you say, Sonja, that all these ideas need to find its common ground. And looking into one country, you might have a DSO talking with a TSO, lifting it up, and then try to make this implementation plan be as realistic as possible, but also as powerful as possible. So I think also it's fair to say that this will take time, although we don't have so much time. And that's why we need to do things like we do today much more frequently. We need really to join forces and to challenge each other. And maybe when we have been through this hearing process and this consultation, we get a lot of feedback, and we might update the roadmap, as you said, Sonja, even with a new flagship, I don't know. But this is not carved in stone, and it will be needed to update it as we go. But I think it's a great step forward that we at least pinpoint what we think is important, and that we have a chain of logic behind what comes first. And this thing with the interoperability area is one example, because it's so challenging that you have locked in solutions which is not open. And we have to solve that. And it's a key area, and actually for all the flagships. And that comes in the way first, because if you don't do that, you can go down the road and then you don't deliver in 5, 6, 7 years. Long answer.
I will try to link
with my reflection.
Yeah, I will try to link this discussion with another question. Håkon, please stay. So there is a question related to, okay, now we move through these milestones and there will be some practice achieved through this. So are we also somehow developing a set of best practice tools, and then we try to fast track them into the application?
Kind of. We are sharing each other's experiences, and we think it's better to join forces than not joining forces. And of course, if you see a very good solution, then you pick it. And
okay,
it's kind of a positive competition, if you understand.
Okay, part of the game,
yeah.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Håkon. Sonia, I think it's time to go on. So let's move to flagship number 4.
So flagship 4 is has to deal with how we enable the large-scale offshore wind energy into the grid. And here you see then some, interdependencies, as the question was earlier about. And so how can we enable then large-scale offshore wind energy into the grid? Of course, we need, again, then regulatory guidelines in which we will involve the regulator. We need hardware and software solutions for DC grids and systems. And we need also, of course, HVDC technologies and material. Maybe some highlighted areas is then the regulatory framework for implementation, especially when we're going to do this large scale. Piloting is one thing, but we need also to have regulated how we do this offshore, especially when we move offshore. Another important item, as Håkon mentioned, it is this multi-vendor and multi-terminal HVDC full-scale demonstrations. We need to have an interoperable grid, which is open, which has no vendor lock-in. And I think these are very important items to be able to succeed offshore. And we have also big questions is that we need to have reliable asset management of HVDC equipment. This cannot be done without remote monitoring and maintenance of equipment. So if we have suddenly everything offshore, this will increase all the complexity with maintenance and asset management. And also we need to have good HVDC cables and components, and we need to have this standardized so that cable of manufacturer A can connect to a cable of manufacturer B. And yeah, that was it. Maybe there are some questions.
Yes, well, there are questions. Maybe I give you the opportunity to say something about research organizations and university involvement. Do you find this flagship as one of those where university could play an important role, or do you find some of the following flagships more appropriate for that? What's your opinion? Can you give us some feedback on that?
I think, thank you for that question, because my personal drive is that we need to go for different innovation models. I think if we need to speed up innovation, we need to work with universities, research institutes, and manufacturers in one single project, or maybe one single topic, maybe a combination of projects. And I see that the financing schemes don't really put up with that. So the universities, they do done the research on the very low TRL levels, maybe missing the link to the manufacturers, maybe missing the link to what we as the end users really need. And I think it is a benefit for everyone if we could work together on, let's say, innovation platforms, innovation centers, and where we could work together. It's maybe not necessary to have a PhD student working in a pilot project, but I'm quite sure that a PhD student will benefit from seeing results implemented in a pilot project. So I think we need to work also with innovation, the innovation methods and the methodologies that we use different in the future than we have done previously. And why do I really mean this? It's that in the end, there will be no single person who understands the whole, let's say, integrated system anymore. We need a cluster of people to be able to understand pieces, and we need then a cluster of people with, let's say, a combined knowledge to understand the complexity of the whole system. And then we need educated people. We need people with good high expertise. And that's also why it's in the benefit of a TSO to have focus on education, on educating, let's say, master's students, bachelor students, PhD students, postdoc, and professors. And so we need this high-skilled people to have this competitive advantage and to find the solutions that we need in the future energy system.
Okay, thank you. One more question, really focused to offshore. So, is it that we give some priority to offshore really compared to other RES, or do we have other RES more streamlined in other flagships? What is your opinion on that? Did we give offshore more priority than other RES? Yeah.
I think it's an excellent question, and the thing is that with many of the RES have already quite high, they are a quite high TRL level, like solar cells, like hydro, like wind on land. I think we have seen we need to get the best potential out of all these solutions, also regarding battery, regarding hydrogen, and I think we are in a good way. But the amount of offshore wind that will be installed, that will be gigantic compared to the solar RES that is currently being installed. So I think there is a quite big difference in scale, and then there's also a big difference in technology readiness level.
Okay, what about hydrogen? You mentioned it. Is it for you more part of flagship 4 or flagship 1?
I think it is actually a part of both of flagship 1 and 2. Because we need to understand the potential, and we need to understand also how we can physically integrate this.
Okay, so we have covered hydrogen
yes,
in appropriate way. So there are questions coming in, but I think we have to move now to the flagship number 5. Could you proceed, please?
Yes. Flagship number 5 is then enabling secure operation when we have a widespread AC/DC grid. I mean, we have already DC lines in operations in many countries, and but what happens if the balance becomes different? So now it's maybe, let's say 80, I don't know exactly the numbers, but let's say it's 80% AC with 20% DC. What happens if the balance is completely different? Well, then we need to have then a good flow and system models available. We need to have the protection and the control of this hybrid AC/DC grids available, and we also need to understand what are the potentials for the ancillary services that we can exploit. So important topics of this flagship is then the deployment of the meshed DC grids. How can that reach its full potential? Another issue is then reliability. Reliability is always a big issue. It is optimization techniques. So how can we, let's say, reach the best potential, the best out of it? And we also need to think about a restoration plan, because the restoration plans are maybe now based on a large AC overweight, and what happens is if the weight factor comes a little bit different. So we need also research on that topic, and then we need to find out that what is the potential of this combined AC/DC grids regarding to ancillary services.
Okay. Thank you, Sonia. So we have received one question, a bit more general. Maybe Håkon, you can answer us about the priority of these flagships when we compare them. Are we going to run them in parallel, or are we putting more pressure to one or the other? How do you find this general framework applicable?
Well, what I think we have already done is to make some sort of internal check with the TSOs. What do you think is important? Where do you think we should align resources the most? And I think we have a very strong feedback from the TSOs that we are really on the right track. So we have 6 important flagships. And then, of course, within each flagship, we need to prioritize. And as I see it today, if we end up with more than 6, then of course it's a little bit concerned that we lose focus. I think the strength of what we're doing so far is to keep it only to 6. But I think it's difficult to say that flagship 4 is less important than flagship 5. In the ambition of Green Deal, we're talking about 90 gigawatt of new wind within 2030. It's only 10 years down the road. And flagship 5 deals actually with how to penetrate all that generation into the grid. We need more DC, we need more AC. So it's in a way linked. So it's, I think my comment today is that we will try to prioritize as good as we can. And that will be based on the feedback we get actually on those who are really interesting to lift up projects in the next phase, in the implementation phase.
Okay.
I think I can compliment on that one. I think it is from we have to see it in such a way that we have, let's say, focused on 6 flagship out of the 100 possible.
Okay, so we already did a lot of prioritization. Of course, this job is never finished, but we believe these are really the right tags to our activities in the future. So, Sonia, I suggest we go to the last flagship, number 6.
Yes, and of course, if we have then, you know, we have the system of systems, and we have so much cooperation that we're really looking forward to. We also need then good control centers and that which are interoperable, and then you can also come back to the questions with this regional security centers. So the main topics is then here. It's a control center interoperability. It is enhanced control and wide area monitoring, and it is, like say, guidelines and tools for a highly complex system. Because if it's one thing, it's sure is that our future will be much more complex than it is today. So here, maybe some keywords or some important milestones. That is vendor independent solutions for control centers. It is for TSOs not sustainable that every time that we shift a control center, we have to do so much programming completely from start. So we would like to see more plug and play solutions. We would like to see solutions where vendor an application from vendor A could be used in a hardware for vendor B. We need to have full focus on cybersecurity. We need to have focus on resilience, and we need to have focus on backup procedures. Another thing is that we are not quite for sure that the system will be so complex that we need more than we need more than humans to control this. So we need more automated decision support systems in our control center, and there are a lot of issues regarding to that. It's like ethics, and it is like rules, and what do you prioritize, and we still need humans for situations that we haven't foreseen. And we need also then more enhanced methods and more accurate representations. And also, as someone said in the sensor, in one of the questions, how do we feel if DSOs would install more sensors? I mean, we would be screaming of happiness. I mean, this is really, the more sensors we have, the more data we have, the better decisions we can take.
Okay, thank you. So this is one of the flagships really addressing vendors, similarly to the one dealing with HVDC and offshore grid. So what is, Sonia, from your perspective, the main challenge with the current vendors of the control systems?
Well, I was addressing this a little bit before. It's that it is for a TSO a huge investment to invest in a new control center. As I mentioned, we are 40 in Europe. There are like 3-4 main suppliers. If we change our control system every 10 years, it means that one assignment per vendor each year, and it is. I don't think it's a viable solution that each of these vendors continues to develop their own solution. I think it would be much more beneficial for both the vendors and us as customers if they would work on finding common solutions that would be interoperable. And of course, I mean, we cannot stand in the way that every vendor would invent their own product plus, but that should come on top of it. So,
Okay, thank you, Sonia. So, Håkon, I have one more question, which might be ready to you, but you can also take it through the conclusion session. So, it's a question related to funding. So, how are these flagships going to be funded? Very general question. Would you like to take it in the concluding remarks, or I would like to slowly conclude the session with Sonia now?
I can take it. Actually, no. I think the idea with the funding is that we see that we should actually use the opportunities now to align forces in order to pinpoint what we think is important. And by doing that, we will have a much greater opportunity to raise the right projects and the large projects which is needed. And in Horizon Europe context, of course, this what we do now is really in order to make that much more aligned and much easier to combine and to find really common grounds for setting up a good project between the TSOs and the DSOs and other players if they're interested. So I think the whole idea with this setup we have made now is really to make a much stronger link towards the funding schemes and the need we have from TSOs. That's the short answer.
Okay,
that's correct. I fully support that.
Maybe one question which goes, I think this is the last one coming in this regard. It's a bit of a feeling of some participants that offshore grid and HVDC systems have some, I would say, priority or some more addressing in this roadmap than the other technologies, other problems, other issues, other challenges. What are your opinion, Sonia and Håkon, about this?
Shall I go first, or?
Yeah.
Please, Sonia. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it is always a problem when you prioritize something. If you have 100 things to do and you prioritize on 6, you have to prioritize down 94 other items. And I think in this case, it has a lot to do with the technology readiness level, where we have seen that the technology readiness level from a number of other technologies is much higher than of this offshore HVDC and all the problems related to that. I'm not saying that there are not issues to solve, but we have already seen, I saw yesterday the latest number, it's already like 3% solar already integrated in Norway. Sorry, in Sweden. I saw a previous number. I have seen that's already integrated a lot of solar, for instance, in Italy and in Germany. We know how to do that. And here we're talking about research development and implement and innovation, where we're looking in where do we need to focus the research development and innovation. And I think there are some issues still with the other renewable, but they are on a much higher TRL scale, so technology readiness level, where we see the technology is already commercially available. Maybe what we're lacking there is some ICT platforms, maybe some aggregator function, maybe some market possibilities, but the technologies are there.
But maybe in terms of funding, maybe flagship 1, 2, 3 can have much bigger funding, and then we balance through the funding and the size of the flagship, yeah, which is also one of the possibilities. Yeah.
Yes, and I think it has
what
also
do you
to
think?
do with
Yeah,
local,
I think we should.
local
I think we
priorities.
sorry, Sonia.
Sorry.
No,
I think we should
Sonia,
add that it was the reason why we had 3 clusters, and I also called cluster 3 the black box. It's fair to say it's really oriented towards the challenges we see from the TSOs. So I think cluster 1 and 2. 1 is really the one system of integrated system, really broad, and the second cluster is really dealing with the fact that the physical transmission grid will be a key component. And the third one is really all the challenges we see with the electronics and everything we, as you say, Sonia, face will be a large challenge for us. We need to focus on that, and that's why we have done it like that. But just bring us feedback. That's why we're here, and we would like to see response in the hearing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Håkon, I would like to pass the floor now to you to bring the concluding statements. Thank you, Sonia. Let's see what comes next. Yeah. So the implementation plan is the next step, and so on. Yeah.
Okay. So thank you. So some key takeaways. If you take the next slide, please. Looking ahead now, we all see that we have a huge challenge. We will solve it, and climate neutrality by 2050, decentralization, increased energy efficiency, deep electrification, flexibility, optimized use of assets and infrastructure, digitalizations are keywords. And in order to deliver on that, we underpin and focus on this fact we also have in the Vision 2030, a system or integrated system. That is what we see. It will be even more complex. And this is in the center of the ENTSO E Vision 2030, which will play a key role in energy transformation. And as we have said several times, of course, the Horizon Europe and other financial instruments such as CEF need to remain strong instruments in order to deliver on this as part of the green recovery. And what we have done now is to present a roadmap produced by more than 40 TSOs in a common way in Europe in order to accelerate the innovation for the TSOs, and in a way that we should do our part in order to reach the neutrality, the carbon and the climate neutrality, which is a really, really large challenge. And we have done this in a little bit new way this time, where we have a new approach to planning RDI activities, where we have these 3 areas, clusters, and where we have also drilled it down to 6 prioritized flagships. And now it will be focused on implementation, integration, and interoperability of technologies and solutions. And these RDI flagships are there to ensure progress through the milestones and the next steps in the implementation plan, where we will actually then lift up the focus on the implementation in itself. And we will not do this alone. We need to cooperate in all dimensions with the universities, with the DSOs, with the TSOs, with the customers. So this is a strong message that this is a collaboration which calls for a lot of good new ways of communicating together, and like this webinar we have today. And we would like to say today, please go in, have your say about what we have presented by responding to our consultation on this RDI Roadmap 2020-2030. And you have some time, the deadline is 20th of August, and then we take this feedback on board, and then we will update the roadmap based on the comments we receive. And of course, we will then present this in an updated way and have a new webinar, and then we take it from there. So thank you very much for joining us. It was a real pleasure to see that so many who actually attended the webinar today. So I think that closed my key takeaways, yours. So thank you all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you all. Yeah. On my side. Bye bye.
Bye bye. Have a nice summer. Take care.
Bye bye.